If the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to do what we all want them to do, they're going to need people like Tank Bigsby. Don't believe me? Listen up. I'll tell you exactly why on this edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
She said it. You're right. And I'm going to say it again. Your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars. Please make sure you head on over to our YouTube page. Make sure you tap in, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and then be so kind to yourself and hit that bell so you receive notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And then wherever you get your podcast that you listen to when you're driving in the car or you're at work, make sure you tap into that location each and every day. We don't want you to miss, just because you can't see my face, we don't want you to miss one of these episodes. All right, today's show and episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we all want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost and or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. Shout out to the everydayers that join us here every single day. We appreciate you. And you can be one. All you got to do is join us every single day. Let's get to it, man. I'm going to give you by the time, I hope, I usually say I don't like to do this to change people's minds, but to influence the way people see things and give them a different perspective. I'm going to tell you why historically, even teams that were known for throwing the football needed the run game for various reasons in order to win a championship. And it wasn't just one player, it was multiple people. That is why in segment 2, I'll tell you why Tank Bigsby has to be big in his second year to really help this team and allow Travis Etienne and Dearness Johnson to be the guys that they are. Etienne is obviously the leader. Dearness Johnson is a change of pace guy. I'll give you some examples of that. But let's go ahead and get it started. One running back isn't enough. It's not. I know it's a quarterback league, and I know people think, oh, it doesn't matter who you have at running back, and as long as the guy doesn't fumble and he can do what he needs to do, one running back is not enough, despite the fact that pretty much the Kansas City Chiefs won last year and the year before with running back Pacheco, and we know that. But they're not really built the way that I'm talking about. I'm talking about teams from the past, and the Jaguars aren't really like or similar, in my opinion, to the Chiefs. The Chiefs are a very unique team. The Jaguars, to me, remind me a little bit of, and don't get mad when I say this just because they're a rival, they are sort of built and constructed without, of course, the Hall of Fame wide receivers, sort of like Indianapolis was back in the day. I think this year everybody is going to believe in their defense. They're going to believe in their defensive scheme. But I do believe sometimes when people think about Peyton Manning, they don't necessarily think about Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady. They kind of they don't think about Aaron Rodgers. They don't think about Brett Favre. They don't think about Drew Brees. If there's one similar player that they talk about, in my opinion, and I know I do it, it's Trevor Lawrence and Peyton Manning. The cerebral, very tall, 6'5", 6'6", the height, like really good arm, but maybe not the Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes arm that you want to think that these elite guys, people say maybe he doesn't have the Justin Herbert. I think he makes all the throws. I think he has a very, very good arm. Don't get me wrong. But I think with him, it's more than just arm strength and gunning the ball in. I think when it comes to the cerebral aspect of the game, and quite frankly, Trevor had turnover issues, and so did Peyton Manning when he first came into the league. That's the guy that I see more than anything. So I'm going to use an example of how Peyton Manning was able to win a Super Bowl, and it's something that had to happen, even though when you retroactively think back to the Indianapolis Colts during the Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, Edgerrin James, the whole era that started with Jim Moore Sr., but then, of course, Tony Dungy. You think about passing, and you think about all of those guys going to the Hall of Fame for catching all of those balls, and Peyton throwing for all of those yards and touchdowns. I'm going to show you something later on that's going to blow your mind about how they were able to win a Super Bowl. But Tank Bigsby was drafted in the third round, and there were people that says it's a waste of a draft pick, right? You just got to think this team had a first round pick as a running back in Travis Etienne. And when I say one running back isn't enough, you could also paraphrase that and say, or change it and say they need more than one. One in this situation would be the starter, and it would also be the jersey number that Travis Etienne wears, number one. They're going to need more than that. And I'm not talking about injuries, although that's a part of it too. I'm not talking about a guy missing the whole season, but I am talking about a player that might get in the game and get banged up or get shook or may have a little concussion. And then you can't just say, okay, you got to be able to adjust. The backups are never going to be as good as the starter, but you can get in a situation where the backups are good enough that you can still run all of the things that you want to run. They're not a liability. And last year with Tank Bigsby, who we'll talk more about independently in segment number 2, looked the part, kind of, but just had some of the worst Murphy's law when it comes to, it seems like bad things happen sometimes when he touched the ball. And they were understandable things, but it's like, I can understand it to a certain extent, but how come I got to understand it every time you're involved in it? And I think that's what happened with Tank. And I started calling him can't get right, man. It just, he couldn't figure it out and couldn't get it. And sometimes that happens when you're trying too hard or you're just nervous. Guys getting to the show for the first time and, get to the NFL and all of a sudden you're trying to prove, you're trying to make sure that, folks know that you can help. And when you start pressing like that, that just means to me that you got to go back to the drawing board and have so much confidence in what you're doing that it becomes second nature. And you're not really pressed like that. And you're not going to be shaken like that when it comes to getting in games. And then things won't start steamrolling and you get to the point where every single time you come in there, you're overthinking it and you're thinking too much. And that seems like what happened. It seemed like he sort of settled down a little bit as the year went on. And he was able to help some, but some of those mistakes that he made, man, they were made by close to the goal line. And that was the thing. It was like the worst time. His mistakes came at the absolute worst time for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So last year, he had 50 carries for 132 yards. Now, that's not good because I know I went to Duval County schools, but 50 carries, if you multiply it just by 3 yards per carry, it gives you 150 yards. So he didn't even average that. He averaged 2.6 yards a carry. And he had one catch. He had 2 lost fumbles, but then in the passing game, I think there was another 1 or 2 balls that kind of bounced off of his hand. And they ended up getting picked, and it was in bad situations. And remember, the Jaguars were only one game from making the playoffs. And how do you change narratives? If you make the playoffs 2 years in a row, sometimes people won't look at Trevor Lawrence like he doesn't deserve a contract extension. You know what I mean? But it's that ebb and flow, up and down nature that has people questioning everything, including Tank Bigsby. I'm going to tell you why he has to be big. Some of the things that we want to all see him do this coming season. I'm going to make sure I get to that in segment number 2 here on Locked On Jaguars. Hang tight. We're going to talk more about Tank Bigsby in just 1 second. All right, today's show is brought to you and sponsored by FanDuel. That's right, man. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have winded down, we get fewer and fewer games, even though I'm loving the WNBA and I'm loving baseball right now. The sports aren't sporting like we want them to, man, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer. Now, remember, read all of the information. Make sure you tap in on all the subject matter. They'll tell you who's playing, who's not playing, and give you all the information you need. So head over to FanDuel right now, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, man. Segment 2 here on Locked On Jaguars. We're at your team every day. Shout out to those serving around the country or even abroad, especially those Jaguar fans. If you're from Jacksonville, I know how that feels to be away from home. Try to give you something here every single day you can hang on to. Now we're talking about Mr. Bigsby, Tank, how big he has to be. He has to be. With a name like Tank, you need to be big. You need to be running people over. You need to be doing those type of things. So he has to be able to be a guy who gets more than 2.6 yards a carry. I say he probably needs to, I wouldn't say triple the 50 carries, but it'd be nice if he can get maybe 120 and then be able to pass protect. I think if he gets 150 carries, something happened to Etienne, and that's not what I want. I also think D'Ernest Johnson is a good player who can help him, but D'Ernest doesn't have to improve. If we're looking at a three-headed monster here at running back with Etienne getting 70%, 75% of the work and being on the field, you still need at least two other players that can help you out throughout the season. It's a long season. And running backs, as y'all know, by nature of that position, running backs take a huge beating throughout the season. They get hurt and get hit just as much as anybody, so or more than anybody, and they have a little bit of a short span, and that's why coaches didn't want to pay them all. So the best thing to do is you got to have multiple guys that can play and help you in different situations. And then even as a preventative measure, not after a dude tweaks his ankle or gets a concussion or gets too banged up, what you want is you want to be proactive and you want to be preventative, right? And the way you do that is you decrease the amount of times that you have to run Travis Etienne in the ground. Now, I know you want to get him the ball because Etienne is one of the 2 or 3 best players on your offense and probably one of 6 or 7 best players on the team. So you do want to feed him, and you do want Travis Etienne to have as many opportunities, as many carries as he can get. However, that does not mean that you need to just act like he doesn't have any backups or act like without him, everything's going to fall apart, and then you don't give him the ball as much. That's where Tank Bigsby comes in. That's why they drafted him. Folks can talk all day about whether they should have picked a running back at number 3 because, quite frankly, like I mentioned earlier, some people still wonder if they should have took Etienne in the first round. I don't have a problem with the Tank Bigsby fit. You can say that it wasn't the biggest priority at the time that they made that selection. That's all well and good. But once they made the pick, I didn't have a problem. I had a bigger problem with Brent Strange being picked before I had a problem with Tank Bigsby, because I thought that's where you start to look for running backs if you're one of those people that, that believes in the positional value and how running backs have been devalued, and taking them in the first round is foolish. Ain't nothing wrong with looking at day 2 and finding a guy that played a lot with that body, played at Auburn in the Southeastern Conference, did pretty well. And he was a contrast to the guy that you already have in Etienne. And he's a contrast to D'Ernest. D'Ernest Johnson is more like Travis Etienne than Tank Bigsby. But even he's not just like Tank Bigsby. Travis Etienne is like a combination of them both with way more talent. But you really, really do need these running backs. You need them. The main thing you need them to do is to be able to pass pro. You need guys that can run the ball in short yardage, that can get you tough yards, especially near the goal line, so you don't have to sit there on 1st and goal from the 3-yard line and throw it 4 freaking times and take a chance of getting interceptions, sacks, penalties that push you back and now forces you to start throwing the ball or settle for field goals. You got to have these running backs, man. And I think Tank has what it takes. It just seems like to me things got into his head a little bit. It would also help that if, you want a rookie running back to learn how to play, that you have a center who can block people and doesn't get the line blown up before the plays can develop. Now, I'm telling you, I saw this stat and I keep looking for it, that Travis Etienne, of all the running backs in the league, contact was made with him first. That didn't, if that's true, which I believe it is, that doesn't mean that when Tank Bigsby's in the game that somehow that miraculously disappears and all of a sudden now they're blocking better. No, whoever's blocking for Etienne, and it's probably, we blame Luke Fortner for everything, so that's what we're going to continue to do. And Bigsby's more of an inside runner anyway, so if there's no way to go, I don't think he had a would I say, a fair shake, if you will. I don't necessarily think it was necessarily a fair shake for Travis Etienne, in my opinion, or Tank Bigsby for that opinion. But the part of Tank's game that has to evolve, the part of his game that has to evolve is you got to, instead of being the guy who we're sitting here saying, man, he just can't get right. That part has to go. You got to get to the point where you're not always on the other end of misfortune. And it's not just misfortune, anything like it just happenstance. If you touch the ball, you have to own it. If you're holding the ball, you have to own it. I just saw he had 2 fumbles. That's 2 lost fumbles. But that's 50 carries. That's 1 every 25. I don't think that's that good, and especially when the team needed him at critical points. Remember, this is all about how you're trying to win a championship. And the Jacksonville Jaguars were 1 game away, 1 win from making the playoffs. And I can count back to Tank Bigsby making mistakes in games that if he doesn't make those mistakes, the Jaguars probably do have a real good shot at winning. We always look at the last game, and it's never the last game that got you in the situation you were in. It's a whole bunch of games. Now, of course, if they win against the Titans, they make the playoffs. But I'm talking about who they were as a team the day that they showed up to play in Week 18. We got to start being accountable. If you're these players, you got to think that 1 or 2 plays ain't going to make that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things. Because if you do that, you'll realize 1 or 2 plays does make a big difference in the grand scheme of things, especially if they take your 1 or 2 bad plays, if you're Tank Bigsby, and combine it with 1 or 2 drops by Calvin Ridley, or maybe it was more than 1 or 2, but then combine that with your center not being able to block, and combine that with guys missing tackles. Now it's not just 1 or 2 mistakes. It's 30 mistakes. That's about half the snaps you're going to get in the game. Tank has to take the next step. He has to be the physical running back that this team needs in order, in my opinion, for the rest of the running backs to maximize themselves. I'm going to use some historical data, and I'm going to show you 2 teams. The Colts, when they played Peyton Manning, who I mentioned earlier, the Colts when they played the Bears, and I'm going to tell you something about Philadelphia when they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, since we love talking about that. And I know we love talking about it, and I know exactly why we do, because that's when we actually saw, with our own eyes, we saw Doug Peterson win a championship. Now, if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN all day, have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis. He brings you can't miss analysis from all the Locked On hosts, the local experts that cover Locked On, and you get it without all of the screaming. So it's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to get to these historical games and to give you a point of view from my seat of what I look back and saw and why the running backs are super important. We'll do that in just a second here in the 3rd segment of Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by BetterHelp. That's right, BetterHelp. Man, if you've ever needed therapy and counseling, like I have, I can be deadly honest with you and tell you how much it helped me, from time management to actually dealing with pain from surgery, even loss of life, and just how I was going to divide my time to spend my time with my family the way I wanted to. Sometimes it led to a little bit of an anxiety attack, and BetterHelp was there to help me. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. We're at your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. Hey, man, Um, we have to sometimes look back at historical games that kind of change the perspective or the point of view where we see things. I'm going to use these couple of games for you real quick. I'm going to use the Colts game, since I've compared Peyton Manning and Trevor Lawrence a little bit and what I hope he has to do. And then I'll use the Eagles game where Doug Peterson beat the New England Patriots. And they beat the Goats in the Super Bowl. So in the Super Bowl with the Colts, they played the Bears. The Colts had been a passing team because they had Marvin Harrison, they had Reggie Wayne, they had Dallas Clark, they had all those guys. And then this is after Edgerrin James had left. So, the thought was that they were more of a running team. And then you get to Miami and there's a rainstorm. Miami jumps out on them. They lead 14-6 after the first quarter, in part because of a Devin Hester touchdown. And I remember the coach needing to change the game. So I'm going to give you Peyton Manning stats: 25 for 38, 247 yards, a tutty, and an interception. And he got sacked one time, right? That's an 81.8 quarterback rating, QBR. Well, QBR was 69, and the rating was 82, like 81.8. In that game, Marvin Harrison, Hall of Famer; Reggie Wayne, probably going to be a Hall of Famer; Dallas Clark, a very, very good player. They had 11 total receptions. They had 11 total receptions for 156 yards. That's terrible. That's bad. 2 catches for Reggie Wayne, 5 for Marvin Harrison, and 4 for Dallas Clark. But they had 42 rushes. Now, one of them was Dallas Clark, and one of them was Peyton Manning. So take them off. They had 40 rushes between Dominic Rhodes and Joseph Adai for 180 yards in this game. Not only that, do you know who led them in receptions? Joseph Adai with 10 receptions for 66 yards. He caught 10 balls on 12 targets. So that's 50 touches. If you include Dominic Rhodes caught 1 pass also, that is 51 touches for a Peyton Manning offense that had Reggie Wayne, of course, Marvin Harrison, and Dallas Clark. Are you kidding me? And I know it was the rain, and you say, well, Wig, that was just dictated. That wasn't dictated by anything but the rain and the weather. Exactly. You don't know what's going to happen when you get into these games. But I tell you what, had they at some point during the season been a team that in their makeup and in their psyche, they operate and they say, no, we're going to run the football. We're just not going to use one running back like we used to with Edgerrin James. We're going to use 2. You don't get to the Super Bowl and then all of a sudden decide that's who you want to be because your offensive line are like, what? We're used to backing up. We ain't used to going forward. They ran the ball a lot more than you think. And they were still able to have a couple of 1,000-yard receivers, dynamic tight end play, and Peyton Manning being Peyton Manning and having a great statistical season. So this takes back, anybody that thinks that, okay, well, maybe that was just that day. You don't get to that day and decide that's who you want to be, because running and physicality is a mentality. They have to have worked on it and they have to have led with it, and it opened up the other things. I'll give you another tidbit. Go back and look at Troy Aikman's splits. Everybody talks about how Dallas was a running team. Troy Aikman threw the ball in the first quarter more than he threw in any quarter of his career. And once they established that, then they became a running team, and Emmitt Smith has more yards than any running back in NFL history. So it's not necessarily the first thing you do is not necessarily who you are. Sometimes you're setting things up, and that's the way that it worked. I'm going to go to the game that all of us love to talk about because it's the thing that gave us hope when Nick Foles, and I know y'all don't like to mention his name, had the game of his life. He had an 87 QBR with 106 passer rating. Nick Foles had 28 completions, 43 attempts, 373 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and they scored 41 points. You want to know why they won the game? I'm going to tell you why they won the game. That was very good and all of that stuff. But the reason why he was able to have that success is because LeGarrette Blount and Jay Ajayi combined for 23 carries for 147 yards. Both had runs of over 25 yards. Now, Corey Clement, now get this, when I talk about the third running back, Corey Clement, he only had 3 carries. He only had 3 carries for 8 yards. But he had 4 receptions for 100 yards and a 55-yard touchdown. So that means that not just the 24 or the 26 carries between the 3 running backs, but the 4 touches that Corey Clement got made it 30 touches. They had 30 touches by running backs. 30 with almost 265 yards combined. 30 touches for 265 yards amongst their running backs. It's unbelievable when you think about it. You don't even remember that being a part of it, and that was the point that I was trying to make. It's like you think back, and all you think back about and remember is Nick Foles catching a touchdown pass on a trick play. All you remember is them going for it on 4th down and people running out there to dreams and nightmares, and Alshon Jeffrey catching a jump ball and Nick Foles throwing all of these passes. You didn't realize that there were 30 touches for 260 some odd yards from running backs. It was a 3-headed monster. This is why the Jaguars need Tank Bigsby. He's not more important than Travis Etienne. He's probably not more important than Dearness Johnson. But he is important because he's the one of those 3 that adds the LeGarrette Blount type physicality, the way Joseph Adai did back when you needed to take over the game in the rain. You may run into inclement weather. You may run into any situation in the Super Bowl or in the playoffs where you need to be able to have an identity and you need to turn it around and use every single person in that running game. I hope this sets y'all free and makes y'all understand exactly what I'm talking about, that I'm not just reaching for something here. Look at those 2 games and look at the stats for those 2 games, and you'll see exactly why I believe it is all hands on deck for Jacksonville, and they need every single person, including Tank Bigsby, in order to win. Now, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I'm going to take a look at a bunch of players like this over the next several days and even in the next week. Guys that you're really thinking about that really, really do need to step up in order for this team to achieve their ultimate goal. My goal is to make you happy every single day with Locked On Jaguars. We're at your team every day, and I hope I accomplished that today. Until next time, I will holler at y'all later on Locked On Jaguars.